He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Aroha works here. Now, you know, she comes.
I'm here at Kimihauora Clinic in Mount Maunganui.
Yeah, we're here most days.
Yep. Yeah. What's the whare up here?
Mangatawa Marae is the name of the actual marae.
The clinic is metres away from this marae. I'm with Maybelle McLeod. She shares the names of the meeting house and the dining hall.
Tamapore te whare tupuna and ngā tuahine, our wharekai. That was named after all the ladies that helped get it up. They were all alive. And the ladies to come, which is all of us.
It's kind of poignant that Maybelle mentions the past women of this marae. The name Ngā Tuahine means sisters, and the women to come after them, because at this marae, the future looks brighter, thanks to the clinic's research into a stomach cancer gene, research that began right here 30 years ago.
Most of the hui were held initially when we first started. Scientists were coming here. I don't think they'd ever been on a marae. And
this place, here within the hapu of Ngā Pōtiki, would become almost like a second home for cancer genetic researcher Professor Parry Guilford.
We got to know each other, and then eventually there was enough trust built, I think, so that they were happy to commit to doing the research with our laboratory.
Kia ora, nau mai hara mai ki tēnei hōtaka o te ao hurihanga ko Justine Murray ahau. I tēnei wiki I Tauranga moana tēnei kōrero, he hokinga mahara. I te kōrero ahau ki tētahi whānau no Ngā Pōtiki, me tētahi kai rangahau mate pukupuku, me tā rātou rangahau. This week, I'm in my hometown in Tauranga Moana for this episode of Our Changing World. The story is a trip down memory lane when a Māori whānau and a team of Pākehā geneticists teamed up to save lives. It was 1984, the era of big hair, electronic music and bold makeup. Maybelle, who was about 28 years old at the time, was working as a nurse in Nelson, and she went back home to Tauranga to visit whānau and found out that one of her relatives was māwiwi, very ill.
Something was really seriously wrong because I went to see her and she looked really dreadful, you know, and unrecognisable. I went back with that feeling of her. I knew something was wrong then, but I shrugged it off. It was scary.
Maybelle's cousin died from gastric cancer, and she was 28 years old as well. Her death had a profound effect on Maybelle, so much so that in 1987 she moved home to Tauranga. Another cousin of Maybelle's, George McLeod, decided to find out more about this disease.
He was starting to scope everyone, you know.
So when you say scoping, what was George doing?
That's screening. And they looked down, they put a tube down and search for abnormal cancer cells.
So the mission to scope more of the whānau was underway, and at the same time there was talk that something else was causing the deaths of this family.
And then I heard there was a curse, and that's why I didn't want to touch it. I didn't really know what a curse really was. I've never heard of the word makutu ever in my life.
The online Māori dictionary Te Aka defines makutu as the following: to inflict physical and psychological harm and even death through spiritual powers. It's also a form of utsu, or revenge for past grievances. And the cause of this makutu, again going back 30 years, was that the family had agreed to sell an ancestral mountain. Maybelle heard of these accusations at the time.
You know, you guys sold that hill behind us. You sold the hill, and that's why you're getting... They didn't even sell the hill. It was taken off us.
So we're not going to get into that story here, but the makutu or curse narrative hung like a low-lying cloud, and fear had a firm grip. Many simply decided to leave.
Half of them had moved away, changed their names, been sent to other places, adopted to dodge the bullet.
To dodge the illness or
The illness and probably the makutu.
And sadly, Maybelle's cousin, who started this work, lost his life a short time later.
When George started it, he died during this. In 1993 he died, so I started in 94.
Maybelle hit the ground running.
So we had to test them all. We had to get everybody's blood at the time. There were somewhat big families, but we had to test everyone because at that time we didn't know who actually was gene positive or negative. They had a 50-50 chance of being one of those people.
Because the cancer was showing up in different generations of whānau members, it seemed likely to be something in their genes which was being passed on. But Maybelle and the team at Kimihauora knew they couldn't do this alone.
And then in 1995, we were given the opportunity to go down to Wellington to the first genetics conference.
Maybelle and the team went to that conference and made some key connections.
We met up with a few scientists, but one that gave us the number of Dunedin. One of them, Ingrid Winship was her name. She gave us the number and I rang them when I got home.
And that was the start of a partnership between Kimihauora Clinic and the University of Otago.
Yeah, kia ora, tēnā koe. I live in Dunedin, but I grew up in Oamaru. So I was born in Christchurch, but grew up in Oamaru.
From his office and on Zoom, I caught up with Professor Parry Guilford, and he remembers that first trip.
So we went up and spent a morning with them talking through the project. And then from there, had numerous more meetings. I'd go back, quite a few times for more hui with the whānau to talk about, what could be done and how long it might take and just how a project might look.
For Maybelle, getting to know these newfound research partners was a slow burn.
We didn't really trust them for a long time. We were always wondering whether we were doing the right thing. I know Pauline used to say, we had to go up to Auckland. She looks at me and said, are we doing the right thing? I have no idea.
So Pauline Harawira, she was a former staff member at Kimihauora Clinic, and she worked very closely alongside Maybelle McLeod. Parry was all in, but he was aware of their trepidations.
I think for Maybelle it was perhaps a bit harder because she didn't know us and she didn't know geneticists and she didn't know whether we were really maybe driven by other ideas. We want to learn about Maori DNA. Maybe she had those suspicions. I think there was certainly a suspicion amongst Maori in general that there was a reason to be distrustful of genetic researchers, and so I guess from her side it was perhaps a bit more difficult to build that trust with me. But for me, I knew what I wanted, which was to sort out all of high death from cancer in that family, and so it was really straightforward for me.
An agreement was drawn up to set clear guidelines.
It was a worthwhile process to go through drawing up that contract because it helped us with some things like, who does what in the project, who is responsible for what. Yeah, and it was also about defining a bit about tikanga and how we would look after the samples and what is exactly is the ambition of the research. Eventually, there was enough trust built, I think, so that they were happy to commit to doing the research with our laboratory.
While they were doing their science, we still had to get everybody in tested.
Asking for blood samples from 100 whānau members was no mean feat.
So we were able to get two things from Kimihauora, which enabled us to do our side of the research, which was they gave us this big family tree showing the clear inheritance pattern of the cancer through the family. And they gave us all these blood samples and all these tumour samples, so we could then use our genetics techniques to work out where the mutation sat, which gene it was in. But also they went to the hospital and got tumour samples. So when people have surgery for stomach cancer or any cancer, any leftover samples from the, after the surgery get stored. So Maybelle and Pauline went to the hospital and got these samples for us as well.
And one concern was where and how the blood and tissue samples were stored.
Oh, is the blood, where's that being put? We went down to see where they put it.
And
Everything, and it was in their lab. Yeah, it took a while. It wasn't just overnight trust.
We didn't want our whānau's tissues being taken offshore.
Yeah, that was in the agreement.
Yeah.
So Erin Gardiner's here, she's just said that they didn't want the whānau tissues to be taken offshore
Yeah,
for study.
It's in New Zealand.
in New Zealand. It was in the agreement that...
This is all the ethical issues around it, eh?
all the things that belonged to us, whakapapa and all, stayed in New Zealand.
they had good reason to be cautious. About 20 years ago, the Nukda tribe on Vancouver Island donated blood for research into rheumatoid arthritis at the University of British Columbia. Now, when the lead geneticist left that university, he took the samples with him to study in other universities in America and in England. Now, this raised concerns about the exploitation of the Indigenous peoples, and it also happened around the same time as Kimihauora's research project.
There was a whole lot of things happening offshore.
This is Erin Gardiner.
Canadian and the Indian and the American Indian and rights to their taonga. Things were happening in their spaces that we didn't want to happen in our space at the time. And so our whānau, even though we didn't fully understand the ramifications of what that meant, in the scientific world, we knew that we didn't want that to happen to our whānau then.
So you can kind of imagine the work that was happening at the time. The project team working side by side, Maybelle and her staff visiting the homes of whānau to go through whakapapa, to get whānau tested, to collect tissue samples from Tauranga Hospital, just getting on with it. And Maybelle thought this research would take years, but that wasn't the case. Professor Parry Guilford breaks down the work in the lab.
To find a gene that causes a human disease, you need to have biological samples to get some DNA, and you also need a really good family tree showing where the disease has been passed down through the generations in that family tree. They worked out, who had died of stomach cancer, and they could map it onto that family tree, so we could see how the disease was passed down through the generations.
Parry and the team got to work narrowing down where in the DNA this problem gene, or maybe genes, might be. And this is tricky because humans have an estimated 20,000 genes, but because they had the family history of disease all written out, they could look to find patterns using something called genetic linkage analysis. There was one cluster of genes in one part of the DNA that they found showing up in those who were sick. From there, they could draw up a list of suspects.
And that list was about 20 or 30 genes long. Not very long. I mean, there are 20,000 genes in the human genome, so we had a nice little short list. But to be honest, we weren't that confident that the gene would be in that short list. It was just our first go would be to look at those genes in the short list. So we did this linkage technique, and that told us that, yes, it looks like the CDH1 gene is involved. Then we went to the technique DNA sequencing, was where you look at the exact sequence of A's, C's, G's and T's in the gene and try and find an error in that sequence of A's, C's, G's and T's.
We all have this CDH1 gene, but in this family, the McLeod whānau, that change in the sequence, that mutation, meant that they had a much higher risk of developing stomach cancer, a 56 to 70% lifetime risk.
We sequenced through that gene in a few people from the whānau who had the cancer, and we looked at a few people who didn't have cancer, and sure enough we found there was a change. There was a mutation, change in that primary sequence, which was present in those who had the cancer and absent in those who didn't have the cancer. And then we're able to kind of look at a whole lot more people and prove that was correct.
The discovery of the CDH1 mutation was, of course, groundbreaking work.
You know, what a relief that looks like we've got it, and we haven't had to look at the remaining 19,980 genes. We've got it quite early.
4 years of testing and going through pages and pages of whakapapa had paid off. Maybelle remembered that first phone call.
One day, Parry had rung me and he says, "Hey, we're going to have to come up there." Getting ready for them, and I said to Rangi at the time, Rangi McLeod, and he was working. I said, "Oh, Parry and I'm coming up." "Oh, yeah, okay, what's that for?" "I don't know, I never know." So, and then they came into the building and they said, "We've found it." And I couldn't believe it. I honestly couldn't believe it. And I said, "Whoa, so quick." Because they told us it was 5 to 10 years. May take. Wasn't long, could have been 18 months.
We thought, far out, we've got to get this locked in and get this information out to the whānau and start testing people, because what we have here is an extraordinary bit of information which is going to have profound impacts on the health of that whānau.
What's also become clear is that if one of your parents has one of these problem mutations in the CDH1 gene, you have a 50% chance of inheriting it, and inheriting this increased risk of stomach cancer.
The way we deal with the risk in the families is to get individuals when they're normally about 15, 16 years of age, and then they'll have a blood sample taken and to see whether they have the mutation that's running through their whānau.
If you inherit this mutation in the CDH1 gene, you've got such a high risk of dying from stomach cancer that actually your best bet is to get an operation that removes your stomach. Can you imagine needing to make the decision? And for many of the whānau, at such a young age too.
But most people eventually will drift towards having what's called a prophylactic gastrectomy, which means just take out the stomach. There's no major cancer there, but let's just remove the stomach anyway to prevent that risk of it developing and getting in the way.
For 2009 is... Stan Walker!
15 years ago, a very talented singer, Stan Walker, won the reality singing competition, Australian Idol.
Give him rest tonight, Lord God.
In 2020, Stan, who has whakapapa to the McLeod whānau on his mum's side, revealed to the world that he had the cancer-causing version or variant of the CDH1 gene.
This whole hill, we've all been struck by this ugly curse, this ugly gene. I've watched everyone die.
Like, I know I'm going to beat this, and Nick and I die. Gosh, that's not funny, but
The documentary, Stan Walker, My True Story, produced by Ruckus Media, gave an insight, gave a fly-on-the-wall perspective into Stan's gastrectomy, the tough operation, and his recovery.
I'm off to bed. This was the night before the operation. I guess I'm excited and nervous at the same time. I know tomorrow's going to change my life.
With any major surgery, recovery can be hard.
Some people struggle and are still struggling years after surgery, so we're still conscious that it's a major thing to do, and not everyone everyone survives it, but not everyone has a simple recovery, and some people struggle for a long time. So we're really keen to do what we can to improve the care of people who've had a gastrectomy so that they don't struggle so much and so they recover more quickly.
So, you okay?
Ready to go.
Ready to go. Yeah. Afterwards, when you wake up, we will get you to HDU today, just purely because you have intrathecal morphine.
Was he putting a needle on me like that?
He may.
What do you think his documentary showed to the rest of Aotearoa? Did more people reach out to you doing interviews? Did it spark a bit of a frenzy?
Yeah, and him. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think I've got that, you know. I think my family's got that. Yeah, they reached out.
Back at Kimihauora Clinic in Mount Maunganui, I'm with Erin Gardiner, a nurse who works here alongside Maybelle. And let's just say it wasn't a normal recruitment process.
I was sort of pushed in.
Talked about that,
Yes. Yeah.
So you were never asked, would you like to work at Kimihauora Clinic?
Yeah.
You weren't asked that.
No,
You were
Maybelle just virtually said, pointed at me and said, you're coming to work for me when your mother goes.
Erin works alongside the whānau and agrees the earlier they test, the better.
Ethically, I think the age limit is 16. We try at 14. Yeah. And generally, they're pretty good. Yeah. And to be fair, the whānau generally prepare themselves for the worst news. You know, they've got an understanding of this thing better than I have, better than anybody else has, because they've had generations of it.
Have you delivered some pretty devastating news, though, Erin, in your...
Yeah, I've had to tell some of my nieces and nephews that they're gene positive. But the bonus about our whānau, again, is that they all know this thing, and now, because of the mahi that was done before I got here, we can do something about it. We're not dying anymore.
Here and around the world, thousands of lives have been saved. Here's Parry again.
We've estimated that there are, over 40,000 people with a mutation in Europe and the US. And of that 40-odd thousand, we think about 28,000 would have developed cancer if they'd been, left alone. So potentially the research has led to about 28,000 people in Europe and the US having their lives saved. I do have to stress that they will be saved by people in their own countries. They'll have their own counsellors, they'll have their own surgeons, they'll have all their own gastroenterologists. So we can't claim all that stuff, but we can say that our research started off that push, which will lead to those lives being saved. So, we're really happy that we're able to contribute to that international effort.
Kimihauora and the cancer research team at Otago University won the top award at the 2023 Prime Minister's Science Awards, Te Puiaki Pūtaiao Matua a Te Pirimia. They received a grant of $500,000, which will be used for further research. As for Kimihauora Clinic, well, the staff and the team at Otago University attended a genetics conference in Portugal back in July.
And also, big news for Maybelle, she is set to retire. Well, kind of.
I don't know. You can never retire off this till you die. Yeah, that's something I know.
You're not joking, by the way, literally. No. You go from here.
No one has left. They've all passed.
Yeah. Talking about the trust.
Yeah. Because you go from here, if you retire from the job, straight into the trust.
Right.
And then you just carry on. You're still there, really. You don't leave, but I am wanting to eventually.
But that doesn't mean...
I'd be glad to lie in every day. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
I'm over this. 30 years. This is 30 years in July I have been at this. That's a long time for someone to be in a job.
What will that mean? What will her informal departure mean to you?
I like that, and that's absolute nonsense. You can never walk away from this project, right? When I'm the same, and I'll supposedly reduce my time in the next couple of years as well. But Maybelle won't be the one running around chasing the family, the whānau members to get them scoped and get them down to the hospital. She won't be doing that, but she's always going to be there and always influencing the how the people are cared for. So I don't buy that she's retiring. That's not a thing.
Kia ora, he mihi tēnei kia Maybelle McLeod, ko Erin Gardiner no te hapu o ngā pōtiki ki Tauranga moana. Huri takumata ki te wai paunamu ki Otago, kia koe e ahorangi Parry Guilford, no te whare wānanga o Otago. He rangatira, tā koutou mahi. Ko Justine Murray tēnei kua te kai hautu o tēnei whakāturanga o te ao hurihanga. Nā Cleakin Cannon ahau e awhi. Ko William Saunders te kai whakarite oro. Ko Liz Garton te tumu kai hautu o te ao hurihanga. Me whai mai i tēnei kōnai ipurangi i runga i ngā taupāanga o te ao, a me whai anō tō mātou whārangi ipurangi, www.irakati.rnz, Irakati Ko, Irakati NZ, Rītaha Whakamua, Our Changing World. Kai pukamata, kai tīhau, ko te tohu maru at RNZ Science. Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Justine Murray ahau, kia pai tō wiki.